In this week's video, I'm going to show you how I produced this image of the awesome McLaren 600 LT Spider underneath the Milky Way. Now this is a shot I took on my recent road trip around Scotland. It was an amazing journey through stunning scenery in one hell of a badass supercar. Now I took most of the photos on this trip using the iPhone 11 Pro for a feature I produced for CNET. But the shot I'm showing you today was taken on my main Canon 5D Mark IV. Now unfortunately it was done in the middle of the night for obvious reasons, so I didn't shoot any behind the scenes video. Instead, I'll be taking you mostly through the editing process of how an image like this is put together. So let's start by taking a look at the raw files in Lightroom. So this would be the main image that I intend to use, and as you can see, if we take a look at the settings up here, this shot was a 30-second exposure at f2.8 ISO 5000. Now that's done to capture as much light as is possible in one shot, and it's that reason why we've been able to see so much of the stars going on in the sky. But in order to make sure that the car stood out, I had to light that as well. But there's no fancy lighting, no pro photo heads going on here. I actually lit the car using just the LED light from my iPhone. So when I started the exposure, I quickly flashed a little bit of light over on the front, and then I went around the back of the house that I was pressed up against, and then lit it a little bit more from the back to make sure that it was all as evenly exposed as possible. Now light painting like that is pretty easy to do when you're using these really long exposures. I only needed to flash my phone's light on the car for only a couple of seconds at a time, because any longer the car would have been very overexposed because of the very high ISO speed that I'm using. So as a result, it did take me a few goes to make sure that it was lit exactly as I wanted to. But this is a decent starting point for our image, and I did take some other ones as well. I've got this one, which is an exposure just for some of the headlights and the light falling on the ground. I've also taken this one, which is darker still and gets a bit more of a light flare around the headlights. The angle has changed a little bit. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to piece that in, but I did take that just in case I wanted it. But we'll start here on what will be the main image, and immediately there's a few things that we need to do before we move over into Photoshop. First of all, we need to fix that white balance. It's far too orange, so I'm going to bring that temperature down probably to about there, and as we can see the tint is already looking quite purple, so we need to bring that down as well. I'm looking for quite a cold image, and that's also going to really help the stars pop out a lot more. So then in the exposure tab, I'm just going to play around with the highlights, and actually, as you can probably see, if I bring the highlights down it spoils the sky but keeps the car looking good. So what I'm going to start with is I'm going to bring them up to +25, and I'm going to use an adjustment brush, reset that, and bring those highlights down by -30. Smaller brush, and I'm going to paint that onto the car itself. It's got auto mask on, so if we just take a look at where that mask is taking effect, it's not going too much into the sky. And there we go, we've got a lot more control over the highlights on the car now without it affecting the sky. I can see it is doing a little bit, but not very much. I can just go in, small brush, and just erase that. But I think that looks good already to start with. The shadows I don't really want to do a whole lot with, because it's very easy to start making this image look just very, very fake if I start to raise that too much. Although you start to get some of the detail from the mountains in the background, I like that it's falling much more into shadow at a lower shadow level. But also, because this was shot at ISO 5000, there is quite a lot of image noise. In fact, as you can see, there's a lot of image noise in this picture overall. So we definitely don't want to emphasize that by bringing those shadows up too much. I do want to boost it a little bit, but I think just to +15 is all we really need. Now I can have a little play around with the whites, and I might boost those just a touch, maybe around +15 again. The blacks I don't really want to do anything with right now. If I do want to touch those, I might do that later on. Texture, clarity, dehaze, all of those I'm going to leave exactly as they are for now. So there's not too much that I want to do to this image by itself in Lightroom, but there is definitely a couple of things that I want to do specifically to the sky, and I'm going to do that by using a graduated filter. I'm going to drag it down like this, and if we take a look again at that mask overlay, we can see that this really is only affecting the sky itself, and that's just what we want. Just going to reset that effect The first thing I'm going to do is just raise that exposure a little bit. I'm going to up those highlights. The shadows I'm going to leave just where they are, but I'm going to start to bring up the clarity. And as you can see, as soon as I do, that's when those stars really start to pop out. I'm going to bring those up to plus 25. That's quite a bit. Now, you can have a play around with the dehaze, but having a look, the higher up I go, I just don't really like what it's doing to the image. If anything, bringing it down looks a little bit better. It takes a lot of the color out, but that's not a problem. But I'm actually going to leave that where it is. I'm going to bring the contrast down just a touch, minus 15 on this one. So that's about everything I'm going to do with the grad filter. So I'm going to turn that off. And I am going to bring in now a different one, the radial filter. I'm going to reset that. And I'm going to just draw that in, position it right over where the main line of the Milky Way is coming in. As you can see, it's down here. And we can take a look at that mask overlay. We can see exactly where that's being applied. I'm going to tighten it up, move it here, and I'm just going to up that feather just to make the effect I'm going to apply a little less obvious, just a bit more subtle. Deselect that, and now I'm going to be working specifically on the stars in the middle to try and make those pop out a little bit more. So again, I'm going to up that clarity, I'm going to up those highlights, up the whites just a little bit. All of this really is down to your taste. Personally, I quite like the look of reducing the contrast on this because it just gives it that extra haziness. It's almost like you can see more of the Milky Way, almost like it's a nebula rather than a galaxy, and I do quite like that. So I'm going to bring those down to, yeah, about there, I'd say. And now if we turn this off and just have a look, then you can see how much more these stars really stand out. They're so much more obvious, and there's a more defined line to the Milky Way itself. So we just quickly flick on and off. We can see what a huge difference that has already made to our base image. What is really cool about this shot in particular is two things that I really like. I think up here we've got a galaxy. I don't know which galaxy, or if that definitely is one, but that's a very, very prominent star, and it has got this banding around it. It looks like it might be a galaxy, but it was surely, with a DSLR and a 16mm wide-angle lens, there's no way I could capture a galaxy. If anyone knows about space and can tell me what that is, I'd be very grateful. We've also got shooting stars. And I'm pretty sure they are shooting stars, not planes, because that is an unbroken line rather than a plane's flashing light where you'd see dot, 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 dot going across. This is one streak. So I think that's a shooting star, and maybe that one. And as a result, I want to keep those in. Okay, so what I'm going to do, just to make sure that things are nice and even, I'm going to press Command-Shift-C. That's going to bring up the copy settings. I don't want local adjustments ticked. I don't want the crop or anything else ticked. Copy, and I'm going to then paste that. Although weirdly, that does look a little bit too blue from this one. So I'm going to warm this back up. Just try and get the colors of the car to match as closely as I can. That's just going to help the blend be a little bit more seamless in Photoshop. Right click, edit in, open as layers in Photoshop. So here we are over in Photoshop, and as you can see, all our layers have appeared in the bottom right. And thankfully, our main image, our base image, is already at the bottom. That means we can just apply these other ones over the top. Now, let's turn those off for now. As we can see, we've got our base layer looking good, and we can now start applying those lights on the top. Now, I'm going to start with these headlights. So what I'm going to do to make sure that they appear over the top of our image is I'm going to change the blending mode from normal, and I'm going to go to screen, because screen is going to help keep as much of a detail around those lights. You can see that starburst effect is still appearing, whereas often I'd use lighten, but lighten, if we look, I don't know exactly what's happening, but it's creating this sort of weird effect to the lights around, which we don't want, but screen just looks much, much neater. I'm sure someone who's much more accustomed to blending modes will be able to tell me exactly what's going on there. All I know is that screen looks better. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to just start to nudge this up. And just by moving the layer evidently isn't going to be enough to make it fit into the position. You can very faintly see the outline of the registration plate here, which is nowhere near matching up with the base layer, and this light is hovering probably about a foot over where the light should be. So what I'm going to do to make this a little easier for myself, I'm actually going to select only this part, and I'm going to press transform. And that's just letting me move this section of that layer independently to the rest of the whole thing. But I think what I'm evidently going to have to do is treat each part of the car separately, because I think that the main headlight is spot on just like that. So I'm going to press OK, turn it on and off. As you can see, that looks absolutely spot on. But for this bit of light, I'm going to have to treat that as its own thing. So I'm going to press Command D to deselect. I'm going to select just that bit, Command T, rotate it down, and then bring it into place just there. I think that looks pretty good. I don't like this extra little line. I'm going to press Option, click, and I'm going to add a full black layer mask which hides everything. And now I can only paint in the bits I want. So for example, then I bring in my brush tool again. This time I paint with white, and I can literally just paint back in that bit of light right there. I don't want it to be too hard an edge. I want some of this light spill to be there because it just gives it a bit more of a natural looking blend. But then I can go back in, swap my background and foreground colors, and paint with black again. And I can just paint away that extra line that we didn't want. So when we zoom back out, that light is on there. It's looking exactly as it would have done. But of course now we've lost that front light because of that mask. So again, bring my brush back in, paint with white, and we can just, I'm going to use a larger brush, just paint right over that, making sure that we've got that sunburst effect on the lights, which looks great. And that is everything we want from that layer. So what about the layer below? What about this layer then? Well, there are a few things we want from this layer. And those things are, well, there are a few things I want from this layer. I want these light streaks coming from the headlights, and I want some of the light detail on the ground, in particular the red from the brake lights. So again, I'm going to try lighten. I'm not sure lighten's going to work. So again, I'm going to use screen blending mode for this. And as before, I'm going to create a layer mask in black, bring up my brush tool in white, and at first I'm going to paint with a large brush, a very large brush, much larger. There we go. And I'm just going to paint in that ground detail that we wanted. So now we've got all the layers nicely lined up, that adding the headlights and brake lights on the ground, and this one adding in those extra headlights with that lovely starburst. So that pretty much gives us our main foundation for the image. So anything beyond this is going to be toning and a little bit of neatening up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Option, I'm going to press Layer, Merge Visible. This way I've now got everything now just on one main layer, so I can edit this as needed. There are some things I want to do before we go any further, and that's just clean up the image and take away some of the unwanted parts of this scene. First of all, that involves this whole highlight here, probably from my phone, which is distracting, and that isn't on any of the other layers that I could mask out. That is unfortunately on our base layer, and there's not a lot I can do about that, except just remove it the old-fashioned way. So I'm just going to see how good a job the spot removal tool can do. I'm going to paint that there. Okay. It's doing great so far. A lot of these spots. Let's see what it'll do to this. You know what? That's actually not bad. We've lost a little bit of a detail in the wheel arch here. So instead what I'm going to do is bring in the clone stamp tool, and I'm going to select a bit here and just paint that in there. Select that. and just paint it in gently there. Just helps keep that line of the wheel arch going around there. Zooming in very close on this bit, again bringing back my spot removal just by hitting J, bringing the size of the brush right down, and I'm just going to do that. It'll go ping, and there we go. It's got rid of those. Just keep clicking around, and again here's a little bit of an odd highlight that I don't want. That one there, and I'm going to move my way around the car. You can see how noisy it is, but there's not a lot I'm going to do about that right now. Now these spots are reflections from the stars themselves. As you can see, it's coming across here, it's coming across the windscreen, and on the bonnet here. So I don't really want to take those out. What I do want to remove down here, all these spots which are the highlights from my light. So bringing back in that brush, I can just paint that in, and away it goes. Here, here, there. There we go. It's working really well. It's amazing how good a job this tool can do. And you could just, if it hasn't done it exactly spot on, you just click again and say, give it another go, Photoshop. See how well you can do next time. And usually it does. You can flick that on and off and see the difference that's making so far. It's often getting rid of reflection, which is one of the best things you can do to tune your car from looking like it's just a snap you've taken on your iPhone to a much more polished, commercial looking image. But the car itself is pretty clean. There's not a lot I really want to do to it. There's no mud noticeable on it. There are some extra spots on the headlight, sorry, the wing mirror there. But this big spot here, I do want to get rid of. And I'm just going to mask that out using the lasso tool, and then using the clone stamp, I'm going to sample from maybe over here, and I'm going to just paint in over the top, resampling each time I go. Now that's going to stand out because that's a much lighter color, I believe, than the background. So if we just deselect that, it's quite obvious that we've had this splotch that I've put in. So I'm going to sample down here and just paint in. It's just giving me a slightly easier base layer to start from than that big white empty spot we had before. As I resample, repaint, it's quite a slow process, but by building it up again and again, it just makes it blend much more naturally. So instead of having that big white highlight, which just spoils the look of that car, it instead blends much more naturally with the rest of the door. And we could bring back the spot eraser tool and just dot on here, up and down, and see whether it can get rid of anything else, smooth it out, and it has done. It's done a great job, in fact. I'm going to bring back the clone stamp tool. I'm going to sample the door just here, and then I'm going to line that up just on there, and that's going to help take out that bit of highlight. And I'm going to do the same again, moving up here, just painting away that particularly strong white line that we don't want. That looks good. And again, that bit can go. It's great using the clone stamp tool because you can very easily see where you're going to be painting. So it's just a case of moving that in, finding exactly the point where the line lines up, and then you paint in. So the car is looking much, much better after we've made those changes. And there are a few extra bits I want to do. There's this little twig which is standing out, easy to get rid of, that bit of rock. I'm just going to go around and just clear up. This was a car park I shot it in, so there are going to be a lot of rocks, a lot of things, but I'm not going to try and get rid of everything. But just some of the ones that particularly stand out, like this here where it's caught the light. I don't think there's anything else. This one just sort of stands out a little bit much, so I can get rid of that. So for me, I would call that done with my spot removal, but again, there are plenty more things left for us to do. So step one is I'm going to duplicate that layer, and I'm going to call this layer C RF for camera raw filter. I'm going to go filter, camera raw filter. This is going to bring up basically the same controls that we've got in Lightroom, but this time we've got a little bit more control about how we use this layer afterwards. And I'm just going to start by bringing down the highlights. This is going to be just for the car, this layer. So I'm going to bring those highlights down. Maybe bring the shadows down just a touch, -7, and boost that contrast ever so slightly. Up with the clarity a little bit. And then I'm going to go into the hue saturation adjustments tab. Now this is going to allow me to get very specific in my control over how the car looks, because of course that is an orange car. So anything I do to the orange tab, the orange slider rather, is going to massively affect what happens to the car. For example, take the hue right down, you see the car goes this funky red color right up, and we get a lime green affair. Now the color is pretty much spot on actually. Maybe drop it a couple of points just to bring it back into a deeper orange rather than the yellowy one we had before. But it's for luminance where we're going to get a lot of that effect coming in, and we can bring that down. And then same with the yellow as well, because the highlights on the car very much falls in the yellow category, and you can see what happens if we bring that up and down. Now I don't want to bring that down too much. I'm going to bring it down by -5, but also going to go into the hue and bring that back into the orange tone. Now this way it blends with the whole of the car much more seamlessly. Before it was, as you can see, it's yellow blending with orange, and it's not great to have two different tones appearing on the car because the car isn't two tones, it's one tone. This is just helping match that much more accurately. Now we can play that luminance a little bit more, and I actually like having a bit of extra luminance on there because it just sculpts the car a bit more. I like what that's doing. I'm going to press OK. If we just flick that on and off, we can see it's not a huge difference, but the car is starting to look so much better because of it. So the next thing I'm going to do, bring up an adjustment layer, and this is going to be specifically hue saturation. I'm going to link it to this camera raw filter layer below, and I'm going to bring the saturation right down. You may be thinking, why on earth are you doing that? -60. And the reason being is because what I want to do is remove the orange color cast that we've got falling on the wheels. If without this, we've got a lot of orange on there, particularly reflecting down from the orange of the car above, making the tire go from black to orange, and we've got orange all around on the brake disc, and I don't want that. So instead I'm going to bring in this saturation filter, bring it right down, and then I'm going to invert that layer by pressing Command and I, so we can't see it, and then I'm just going to paint it back in by painting in white, and that means I'm just painting in a layer which removes all of that orange color cast on the wheel that we don't want, trying not to paint it on the car, because this brake disc, these alloy wheels, these are steel colored. There's no color in them. It's just gray and silvers. So by painting this in, it's just getting rid of those reflections, getting rid of that unwanted color cast, and that looks already a lot better. Now I could also paint a little bit in on this, because inside the car it's black. I'm going to paint this wheel and over here. I'm going to leave that in here because that is reflecting directly above. That's a natural reflection rather than just an odd color cast, so that's fine. And same goes for this line up here. Actually no, it doesn't. I'm going to get rid of this because I think that's going to look just a little bit neater overall. Is I've removed the orange from the L and the T. I'm not supposed to do that. Flip that color back and I can just remove that layer, therefore bringing back the color of LT. That's supposed to stand out, very vibrant orange, spot on. So it might not seem like it's made a huge difference, but it just helps give a more polished look to the shot overall by removing that orange color cast. It again transforms it from being a snap into being a more commercial looking shot. So at this point, just for ease of working with the file, I am now going to flatten the image. And that just means that I don't have all these different layers going on. I've just got one single file with everything in there, which is great because then I can just quickly duplicate that and go back into filter and camera raw filter for a little bit more tweaking. Now I'm not totally happy with the color I've got on the car itself. So I'm going back into my HSL adjustments, and with the luminance of the oranges and yellows, I'm just going to tweak these around a bit just to help make that color pop a little bit more. I'm going to bring that orange luminance up and up the saturation. I'm just going to, yeah, as I say, I'm just playing around with these, just balancing, moving them up and down, seeing how things change. In particular, the top of this door, because I didn't really like how those colors were blending together, but by moving this around, you can see what adding in that extra yellow is doing. It's just filling in that gap where the color looks a little weak around here. I'm just getting it to look overall a little bit better. That just means that the whole car is just more evenly exposed. The color is even from over here to on the door. The tone is exactly as it should be. One of the problems with lighting it very quickly with my phone, as I did, it's very difficult to get an even tone when you actually take the shot, so you do need to correct for that in Photoshop, as I am doing, and I think that's looking good. If we turn that on and off, we can see we've got a deep orange tone. Everything just looks much better. So I'm going to merge that layer, and then I'm going to duplicate it again, and I go right back into Camera Raw filter. Why on earth am I doing this? Well, there are some extra changes that I want to do. First of all, I want to bring in a graduated filter right on the bottom, just like this, and I'm going to darken that down. Darkening the ground, because I did feel that how I'd taken the image to begin with, there was too much light on the ground. It just looks... it's a little bit too bright and a little bit fake. I want the car to look like it's sitting in a dark part of the world, which of course it was. And let's take another one on the sky. Not the exposure down that far, obviously, but I do want to bring it down just a little bit. I think that's looking really good. It just helps draw the eye more to the car in the middle, and it's also helping boost those stars in the sky a touch. Okay, again, I'm going to duplicate that layer, back into Camera Raw filter so many times. It's probably not the best way of working. There's probably a lot of people looking at this thinking, how on earth do you keep on going back into that same tool again and again and again? But it's just kind of how I work. But particularly now when I'm wanting to apply some preset color toning over the top, I've shown in videos before that I don't like just applying one preset to an image, say A2 raw, and that's just it. I don't want that to be the look that the image has got. So instead, what I like to do is apply them using layers, which allows me to then dial back the effect. So I'm getting only the color toning that I want, but it also allows me to layer them up over the top of each other, getting different color tones. And as I'm going down through these different presets, I'm just keeping an eye on how it's changing the overall look, the overall tone in the image. It's a really nice way of just experimenting and seeing exactly the sort of look that you may want to get. I actually really like how A10 RAW looks. It's actually stripping away some of that blue from the sky. Yeah, I think I'm going to start by applying A6 RAW half. I'm going to press OK, and then as you see, it's applied all of that filter to the whole shot. So I'm going to bring the opacity right down to 0, and I'm going to build it back up bit by bit until I get to a point where I'm happy. And I actually think maybe around 50%, which means that I'm only applying a quarter of the full effect to this shot. If we turn it on and off, it's a subtle change, but it is just enough to help bring in an extra little bit of toning to the shot, and I like it. What I do then is merge that with the below layer and then duplicate that again, which means I'm then applying another filter subtly on top of the first one. And by doing this as many times as you want, it allows you to build up completely unique color tones that you couldn't get by just going in and applying one preset. You build those layers up. So I actually really like the look of A5 RAW half. It applies a lot of blues into the shadows, and I just think it looks great with this shot. But again, it's far too strong. So I'm going to bring that opacity right down to 0, and I'm just going to steadily bring up to the point where I want it. And again, I think around 50% for both of these is looking good. If we flick that on and off, it's nowhere near as strong as it first looked when we saw it. I really like that. So that's good. And I'm just going to merge that down, and maybe one more time, we'll just see what it looks like. And I'm totally just experimenting at this point, and you should definitely do the same with your shots. Just give things a try. You can always go back, you can always delete that layer, you don't have to do it, but I think it's really interesting to see what sort of effects you can get just by layering them up and turning them on and off. I really like the look of A10 RAW, half, but not all of it. So I'm going to bring it down and then build it up. It gives a little bit of film fade to the shot, and again, you know what, I think 50% opacity looks great. I really like what that's doing to that shot. Yeah, I'm very happy. So I'm going to merge those all down by going layer, flatten image, and there we go. But before we finish, there is one more thing that I want to try on this image and just see if it's going to help give it a little boost, and that is using a dodge and burn layer. And the way I do this is by creating a new blank layer, go edit, go to fill, and fill with 50% grey. As you can see, that's just created a whole load of nothing. But I go to the blend mode overlay, and that makes it completely disappear. But then if we go ahead and paint with white over the top, you can see it lightens the layer, and if we paint with black, it darkens the layer. Clever stuff, right? Undo those. Obviously, those effects were very, very strong. We don't want to use anything like that much. So what we do is we go in our brush tool, we go opacity down to about 12 and flow of around the same. And that just means that when we paint white in this time, bit by bit, it's a very subtle effect, and we can just paint it around just the areas we want. Usually on cars, I just want to accent what's already there. So certainly boosting up some of the detail on the wheels, carbon fiber work here, and lighting up that back wheel as well. Then swap the colors, paint black, and that allows you to darken the shot. And there are a few parts that I want to darken. I want to just try and bring down this whole panel because it is a little bit of a weak color, and same on here too. I want to highlight this shadow. It's looking good. So that's our dodging and burning layer done, and if we turn that on and off, we can see how much of a difference that has made to the look of the car. We've carved out the shape of those body panels a lot more, and it just gives it a much more polished, much more dramatic look. But the absolute last thing that I wanted to do in this image is just make it a little bit less tall, because right now it's in 16:9 aspect ratio, which means we've got all of this sky extending upwards. I want it to be able to fit a little more easily into Instagram and just into other places online where such tall aspect ratios don't really work. But the way I've been doing that basically is by taking out a chunk of the sky and just shifting it down. And as you can see here, that's exactly what we've done. We've got this big section of sky. If I just look at that by itself, I've just literally taken a slice out, shifted it down, and then I've added a mask in order to make it blend properly with the background below it, which just gives us a much better aspect ratio to work with. Obviously we've got this strip at the top, but I'm about to use the crop tool, and I'm just going to bring that down to there. It's a non-standard crop. It's not an exact 5:7 or anything like that, but that's fine because it'll give us a little bit of room to work with wherever we post it later. I'm going to press OK, and that then does finally give us our finished image. So hopefully that's been an interesting insight into how I put this shot together. I apologize that I didn't have proper behind the scenes footage, and should also apologize for what has probably been quite a rambling little tutorial. Hopefully you've been able to follow along, and I really hope that that has given you some good tips on how to do this sort of photography yourself. If you have enjoyed this video, then please do make sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you don't already, leave any comments you might have in the box below, and I will see you next time.